Good morning. Welcome to Wake Up with Ashland. My name is Eric Brooks. I am the curator here at Ashland and Henry Clay Estate, and it's great to have you with us this morning. We're always glad to be able to get together with you this way and to share some of our collection and some of the stories within it. So thanks for being here. I want to take a minute to thank Dupree Mutual Funds for sponsoring this series. It's been a great pleasure to bring it to you, and we're very pleased that they were willing to work with us to make that happen. So thank you to them, and thanks for tuning in. Good morning, Cameron. My colleague Cameron is watching. Glad to see that. Today we're going to do something a little different. We've talked about a variety of artifacts thus far over the course of the last several months. Today we're going to talk about an artifact in the collection that is sort of unique, well, not entirely unique, but at least different than the ones we talked about thus far, because it is not an authentic artifact. That is to say, it is a reproduction. You may ask yourself why we would have a reproduction in the collection, and there are a number of answers to that. In many cases, we have reproductions where we don't have access to the original. It's in another collection, it no longer exists, whatever. There are a lot of different reasons why that might be. Not that many years ago, we didn't have very many of those. We didn't really do that. But over the last 20 years or so, we have changed our approach to our interpretation in some important ways. Mostly that we are now creating an interpretation and setting artifacts and selecting artifacts to fit that, to allow us to tell the story we want to tell, rather than going to various artifacts and telling the story because they are where they are. And part of that means if we want to tell a particular story and our collection that we own, the authentic artifacts we own, are not sufficient to that end, we will look for other artifacts and reproduce them to do that. Now, when we do that, when we take a tour, if you go on a tour here, we urge you to do that. We're available for tours. You can go to our website and learn more about that. We will always tell you what is and what is not a reproduction. That is an integral part of the ethics of the museum world. Anytime a reproduction is used, good morning, Shirley from Alabama. Good morning, Mike and Sue, two of our volunteers. Thanks for tuning in. The ethics of the museum profession is that you never try to pass off a reproduction as an authentic original. And we're very clear about that. Everything in our tour that is reproduced, we make clear is reproduced. And that is part of what we tell the visitor when they come on the tour experience. But a lot of the reproductions that we use are really very important in that they expand the story in remarkable and important ways. They allow us to tell things that we otherwise could not tell. And this artifact is a great example of that. For a long time, we've told the story or explained the fact that Henry Clay was someone of profound fame in his time. Even though the media wasn't quite like it was today, his image was still widely reproduced, frequently seen in newspapers, campaign materials, etc. So he was extremely well known. And what that meant was that he was a celebrity in pretty much the modern sense of the word. When he went places, he sacrificed a measure of his own personal privacy because of his fame. And that didn't really bother Clay. He was okay with that, but it was certainly something he had to deal with and could be problematic. And this picture that I'm going to show you demonstrates that about as well as any picture could. This particular picture is a reproduction of a painting called The Illustrious Guest or The Distinguished Stranger. The painting was originally done by a man named James Henry Beard, an artist who lived at various times in both New York and Cincinnati. He actually painted it in New York, brought it to Cincinnati, and sold it in Cincinnati to a private individual. So let's take a look at the image now. You can see here, I'll try to scoot back a little bit so you can see the whole thing. It's an image of Henry Clay. He is at a tavern. He is seated in a chair. You can see he's kind of kicked back. His feet are in front of the fire. He's reading a newspaper. And yet there are all these other people in the tavern. And every one of them is in some way paying attention to or obsessing over Henry Clay. So we come in close. We got this guy here. He's looking at Henry Clay and down at this child. And apparently he's forgotten that he's holding on to a stovepipe. I hope he wasn't getting burned. Good morning, Deb. Deb is a colleague who lives in Florida. Hope you're doing well and everything going on down there. She's a curator at Disney World. If there's ever an interesting place to be a curator, I think that would be it. But anyway, so I hope he's not getting burned, but he's paying attention. I love this small child. Henry Clay always had a way with children. Unlike most adults, especially most men of his era, he got on very well with children. And so it's not surprising in some ways that this child was taken in by Henry Clay. He doesn't seem to be paying much attention to her, but she's looking at him. These people at the back, these are a little hard to see, are having a drink and probably discussing the fact that Henry Clay is sitting there reading his paper. These guys have picked up a cane. They're looking at a cane that is apparently Henry Clay's. Interestingly enough, we have this cane in the collection. I don't know if this is the cane they're looking at, but it is engraved on top. So that may be the cane they're looking at. That cane belonged to Henry Clay. He gave it to another gentleman. Kind of a neat piece. So we can see that. These two fellas are looking at the guest book, and if you get really close, hopefully we can see this. There are two signatures that can be read in the guest book. Henry Clay's is right there, down at the bottom. And then above that, a few lines, is J.H. Beard. So that's how the artist signed his painting. He stuck his signature into the guest book. I think that's pretty cool. If you're going to sign a painting, that's a good way to do it. So these guys are looking at that and pointing it out. And here, perhaps some of the wives or some of the ladies who happen to be here, and another small child, they're hiding in the doorway, also getting a peek at Henry Clay. So you just got to like that. That's just a really cool image. Here's some luggage. This may be Henry Clay's luggage. We actually have his trunk right here. So it's kind of neat to be able to display this with some of those kinds of things because you can connect it to the work. Now, we don't have any reason to believe that Beard painted this from something he saw in life. It's just something that he composed. He'd probably been to taverns. He'd certainly seen Henry Clay, etc. So we think it's just something that he created based on that. But it's really a neat piece. It's a neat picture that really communicates an aspect of Henry Clay's life in a way that we couldn't do otherwise. Now, this particular picture is what is called a G. Clay print. And a G. Clay print is something that only relatively recently has been possible. The way this is done is you take a very high-resolution image, an image that you can blow up to the actual size or near the actual size of the painting without losing any detail. You then put it on a computer, attach that computer to a special printer that prints on canvas. Now, you can also do this on paper, but in this case, it's done on canvas, and it just prints out. It's a computer-printed image. So it's relatively easy to do. It's not dirt cheap, but it's not terribly expensive. It certainly has, compared to the cost of acquiring a piece, it's a lot less than that. So in this case, it was a relatively affordable way to get this out where it could be seen. And this is something we did in conjunction with the owner of the piece. You never do this without getting permission and making sure that they are okay with that. We did that. So we have permission to have this here. And it's been a very important part of our tour since 2009. It's just a really, really neat piece. Now you may wonder, how did we come into contact with this piece? Well, that's an interesting story in itself, and you can actually look it up. I got a call one day, I guess it must have been in 2009, maybe 2008, from my dad, who called me up. He said, "Eric, there's going to be a painting of Henry Clay on Antiques Roadshow." And I said, "Well, all right, I'll check that out." And I thought he meant like a portrait. We have lots of portraits. There are lots of portraits. And I wasn't prepared to be all that excited. But, because there are lots of those and not that hair-raising, I guess, unless it happened to be one from a really unusual era. But I watched the road show, and eventually this came up, and I nearly fell out of my chair because you just don't see this sort of thing. This is actually what's called a genre painting. Genre paintings are paintings that capture a moment in time, a scene of life. They're not portraits. They're not posed. They usually are something like this, where you see a whole bunch of people doing something. So that's really kind of unique and unusual, and we're fortunate to have a number of reproduced genre paintings in the collection. When you're telling a story, when you're interpreting a part of a person's life, being able to show this is like having a photograph of that particular moment. It really is a unique way to draw people in and be able to illustrate the story. So it's great when you can do that. And we have others in the collection. This is one of 4 or 5, maybe more than that now that we have. This one is in a private collection. This is another one. This one is called The Last Communion, or The Final Communion, and it shows Henry Clay receiving final communion from Reverend Butler, the Episcopalian chaplain of the United States Senate. See him there holding his goblet. Next to him is this gentleman. This is an African American. His name is James Marshall. James Marshall is a really interesting person. He was with Henry Clay the last several years of his life. He is not enslaved. He was a free man. Clay hired him as a valet. He worked for Henry Clay in D.C. and traveled with Clay to Cuba. So quite an interesting story. It's fascinating that the last African American in Clay's life, with whom he was intimately involved, was not enslaved, but rather a free man. And it's great that we have this image. Now, this particular image is in the collections of the Kentucky Historical Society, so it's already in a museum collection. We borrowed the original. Deb, you may remember that. I'm sure you and I worked on that when you were at KHS, but it's in their collection. And while borrowing the original is great, and we will, I'm sure, do that again at some point in the future, it's not something we can do continuously. And this is really an important way, again, to discuss the death of Henry Clay and document this particular part of it. So we reproduced it with their permission so that we could tell this story on a regular basis. There are actually 2 of these paintings. There's another one in a private museum collection in South Carolina. And there are some interesting differences that I can't explain. I think in the other painting, for example, Reverend Butler is wearing a white robe and James Marshall is standing. So why that is, I don't know. But these were painted right around the time that Henry Clay died. So again, another really interesting and important piece. We have another one in this room over here in this corner. These are all in the Henry Clay bedroom. And this one I just put up here because, well, we had an empty spot and it was a convenient location. We don't really interpret this one a great deal. This is a picture of a ship. This particular ship is called the USS Whig. And the USS Whig was named after Clay's political party. And the original painting of this ship was a gift to Henry Clay. It's a really fascinating piece. It's also in a private collection. It's actually inscribed at the bottom to Henry Clay. One of the other unique things about this piece is that the letter that came with it from the man who gave it is actually UK Special Collections. We borrowed that and displayed it right alongside the painting, the original painting. We borrowed that once as well. So that's a really amazing thing. You don't usually get that opportunity to have all of the documentation alongside the artifact itself. This is actually one of 2 paintings of ships that we know of that Clay owned. He owned one of a ship called the USS Henry Clay, which was named for him. And again, the owners of the vessel gave it to Clay along with free passage on the Henry Clay, which unfortunately he was never able to use. That painting's whereabouts at this point are unknown. We do have a reproduction of an engraving of that painting, which is not currently on display, but it's a very nice piece. And again, another piece that we know Henry Clay owned. So you can see that through these images, we can expand the story we tell a great deal, and we can bring things back in some way that Clay owned, that help people understand what Ashland was like in his time. So it's a great opportunity to do that. It's great that the technology exists and that we can work with people to make these things happen. So we have others in the house in a variety of locations, but it's something that museums do now that they didn't used to be able to do as easily or readily, that make it possible to tell stories more effectively and more interestingly. So it's great that we're able to do that. I hope you've enjoyed this look at a different aspect of what we do and how we do it, and hearing some of the stories of these pieces. We always appreciate you tuning in. Again, we are open for tours, so please visit our website. You can find the information for those there. In August, we're going to be doing the Women of Ashland. We'll be doing that tour Wednesdays at 4 in recognition of the centennial of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, of which Madeline McDowell Breckinridge, Henry Clay's great-granddaughter, was a major part, an important player. So anyway, if you haven't ever taken that tour, it's a good opportunity. Sue Andrew, who is currently on, will be doing that tour for the most part. She's really great at it. She's did a lot of the research that went into that. So anyway, it's a great opportunity to check out a different tour that we haven't been doing as frequently here recently, and you can check out all the information on all of the tours. As is noted in the notes here, if you'd like to learn more about our collection, any and all of the pieces in the collection, you can go to the link there and check out our online catalog. Something we're very pleased to be able to do is to put the collection out there where you can look at it. It gives you a way to connect to me as well if you have questions, but you can look at every artifact in the collection on Past Perfect Online. So enjoy that, have fun with that. That's a great way to learn more about Ashland. Lastly, if you go to our website, you'll notice the donate button. We certainly appreciate all of your support, any support that we can get. It's a difficult time for museums, and we appreciate the help. We're doing pretty well, but still in all, any help we can get is help that we definitely need. So thank you for that, and please take the opportunity if you can to do that. Great to see everyone. Everyone have a good day. If there are no further questions, we'll see you next week. Cameron will be back next week, and then I'll be back the week after that. So have a good day. Thank you very much.